Welcome back to another episode of Games Denominations Play. Alternatively, transcriber from Facebook. Today's topic comes from the Facebook WELS Discussions, in parentheses, Wisconsin Evangelical Lutheran Synod Facebook group. This was posted on March 17th of this year by Jake Ingalls. He writes, "This happened in an LCMS school, but the spirit of the age is corrupting all of confessional Lutheranism. The obsession with winsomeness, agreeableness, passiveness, all under the label of, quote, love, end quote, is literally resulting in the daughters of the confessional Lutheran Church being abused and raped, and their sons becoming apostate." The next words are in all caps. "This is the tip of the iceberg." He continues writing, back to normal words, "Stop worshiping the idol of love and start worshiping the God of love, mercy, and grace for the repentant, and," that's in all caps, "white hot wrath and holy fire against the defilers, adulterers, abominations, and unrepentant." What is he referring to, you might ask? Well, included in his post is a screenshot of someone from Twitter by the name of John Benken, last name spelled Behnken, at Luther Enjoyer. He posted this on Twitter. The, quote, speck, end quote, has been positively identified as Diego Marroquin, last name spelled Marroquin, 36, of Guatemala, who is facing one charge of sexual assault on a child under the age of 15 by a person in a position of trust in Denver, Colorado. In John Benken's post on Twitter, he includes two images. One is an image of the subject who's being charged with sexual assault. He appears to be a Hispanic, middle-aged male, not a fully formed beard, but enough facial hair that you can tell that he's got a mustache and some chin hair. And he's got really long, dark brown hair. The right screenshot is of the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, quote, from Luther's Large Catechism with annotations and contemporary approach. That quote from their recently redone Luther's Large Catechism, that was done back, I believe, either late last year or this year. That quote reads as follows: "However, though some of us are burdened with homosexual lust, pornographic addiction, transgenderism, pedophilia, and polyamory, more often they are the speck in our neighbor's eye rather than the log in our own." In parentheses, see for reference Matthew chapter 7, verses 3-5, end parentheses. Now, the reason that I am cross-posting this between Facebook and Games Denominations Play is due to the fact that this came to my attention as I'm in the middle of researching cases of sex abuse, assault, rape, etc. that occur within the WELS and LCMS Synod. The revisions to the LCMS version of Luther's Large Catechism are absolutely horrendous, as you just heard me read. Just because someone is, quote, burdened with ... pedophilia, end quote, that does not mean that they are the speck in our eye. That means that they have a problem that we need to be aware of, especially if there are allegations of assault against them. Because, as we're seeing in this case, and in many other cases, when you abuse positions of trust, especially within a denomination or another religious sect, you are harming both physically, mentally, and spiritually the people that are supposed to be in your care. I would argue, as I believe many of my listeners would as well, that if you knew of the abuse and did not speak up about it, you are also just as culpable. The thing that I want to point out before I dive into the comments section is the author of this post on Facebook believes that it's all due to progressive tolerance and liberal policies in the LCMS, and that if nothing is done about it, that somehow translates to WELS daughters becoming raped and their sons going apostate. That has earned it this spot in Games Denominations Play. No, it's not that there are vulnerable people in the church, or that when you're in a position of trust in the church, that can easily be taken advantage of and abused by individuals such as this jerk, and that it happens regardless of what denomination you're in. It is definitely not that. No, it's because they're in the LCMS and they're more liberal and progressive than those of us in the WELS. And therefore, it's because of those reasons that this happened. That is an absolutely disgusting take. But it is definitely one that I expect from someone who has drank the Kool-Aid. Side note, I do know that he said confessional Lutheranism in his post, but he obviously is referring to the LCMS's position by way of referencing their edition of Luther's Large Catechism. This post, as of recording, only had 5 reactions, but plenty of comments. So many comments that I had to handpick the couple that I was going to reference in this video. You're sure to see some returning commentators here from previous videos that I've done. Like I said, I had to sort by top comments. So let's start at the top of the top comments. Alan Lubeck comments, "Is that a quote from the despicable excuse for Luther's Large Catechism that CPH, FYI, that is short for Concordia Publishing House, recently published and far too many LCMSs defended?" Jake Ingalls responds to Alan Lubeck saying, "Precisely." Leroy Green comments, "This is a horrible event. Our hearts bleed for what this family is going through. That being said, there is nothing in confessional Lutheranism that permits or encourages this behavior. We need to condemn Satan and his influence, not the church. Love does not encourage rape." Leroy, it's not an either or. You can both condemn the person who committed the sin as well as the church leaders who ignored and discouraged the family from reporting it. More on that later. The screenshot from an article will be included later in this video, and I will do a separate video just detailing that entire article. Meanwhile, back to the Facebook discussion. Jake Ingalls responds to Leroy Green saying, "Absolutely, but there are policies and attitudes that enable things like this to happen." Leroy Green responds to Jake saying, "Such as?" Nick Baldessaro responds to Jake Ingalls also, saying, I think what we're looking for here is 1 Timothy 5, verse 8. Quote, if anyone does not provide for the own, and especially his household, he has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. End quote. Shepherds, families, congregations, and synods that embrace worldly fads tend to sin against this commandment and to lack repentance about doing so. A failure to protect one's family, flock, etc. from predation is a sin. Lutheran progressives will intentionally downplay predation that results from pro-criminal progressive policies such as intentional failure to enforce border laws. One way they do this is public and private attempts to silence victims, where their voices might reveal the physical and spiritual danger of such uncompassionate progressive policies. Here he shorts the word progressive to prog. The administration doesn't appear to have been protecting victims of slander. They were apparently protecting their guilty selves and guilty consciences. Let's see how it plays out. Right now, it looks like the involved parties ought to publicly repent for failure to protect their sheep in an evil attempt to look cool and, quote, tolerant, end quote. Oh my God, this guy is unbelievable. What about progressive policies has to do with a youth worship leader raping a 16-year-old? Allegedly raping a 16-year-old. That has nothing to do with progressive policies. It has everything to do with abusing one's position of power, especially religious authority within the church. And instead of addressing it, you just skipped right over it and made it all about leftism and progressivism. One commentator, Andrew Rush, makes several great points about lackadaisical policies and poor attitudes regarding investigating those who are chosen to be in some sort of leadership role in the church, but he is ignored by everybody else. Leroy Green responds to Nick Baldessaro's comments, saying, there are two problems with your response. In both cases, you are assuming guilt, which is a sin. First point, there is no indication that Diego is here illegally as you insinuate. Second point, the administration said the event did not happen. If that is true, confessing to a sin that did not take place would be a sin. It may very well be that a court finds Diego guilty. By declaring he, the admin, and the church guilty before the case is litigated as you are doing is Marxist ideology. Oh my God. Look, I agree that people are innocent until proven guilty. However, taking a glance at the news that resulted in this guy getting arrested and the quote from the article that will be mentioned later in the comments below, that is not Marxist ideology. That is taking a look at allegations against a subject and saying, wow, he looks rather guilty, and so do the church administrators. It is not Marxist to take a look at something that affects the church negatively and say, wow, this looks bad on the church. They should have done better. Leroy Green then goes and does a separate comment response to Andrew Rush, saying what is, in my opinion, the most unintentionally funny sentence ever. He says, there have some excellent church youth leaders, but the Catholic Church's experience is infamous. To condemn all church leaders because if your example is inappropriate. So on the one hand, all church leaders are not the one church leader that Andrew Rush personally had issue with, but the Catholic Church is infamous for their kinds of church leaders and sexual abuse. So Leroy, which is it? If he were to answer, he'd probably say, obviously the WELS, because the WELS doesn't have any bad apples. Not only did he drink the Kool-Aid, but he also went back up for seconds, I guess. Andrew Rush responds back to Leroy's comment, saying that it's not that I condemn all church leaders, nor do I claim Boy Scouts is perfect. However, in general, there are better systems for protecting youth from groomers. Background checks to adult leaders at all times and interview/feedback are all good policies, not only to protect youth, but also to protect adults from false accusations. These were all codified in the BSA by the 90s in response to the issues you highlighted. He then continues to say a couple extra things, and I noticed that Leroy never responds to him. Why respond to a reasonable person? Am I right? Alan Lubeck, our favorite commentator here on the WELS Discussions group, comments, I think many here are missing the point of the OP. It is not an attack on any particular church body or pastor, or even accused defendant. It seems to be an observation of the antinomianism and disdain for God's law that is increasingly tainting Lutheranism, and the church at large even beyond Lutheranism. One example is the citation from a recently released CPH large catechism containing some, in my opinion, less than help notations by ELCA types. But it shows beyond this in church leaders neglecting their duty to call people lovingly to repentance when needed, ... and overly winsome communion statements almost apologizing for people not being able to commune outside of their fellowship. Many congregations now refer to closed communion as, quote, close, end quote, communion, to avoid, quote, overly offensive, end quote, terms, such as, quote, closed, end quote, which are really a better description of what confessional Lutherans practice. Communion is not a show of closeness, but oneness, in confession of faith, ... and the altar is closed to those of a different confession of faith. Now, I'm not going to say that I don't think that OP has a couple screws loose when it comes to his post regarding this sexual assault of a minor by someone who is in a position of spiritual authority over her. And, okay, yes, I will put the alleged in there because the case has not been resolved yet. But Alan is doing great at actually, it's all about true Lutheranism, and it's not about the spiritual abuse that goes on and affects other people. For him, this quickly became a conversation topic that's less about the potential harm of people who abuse their spiritual authority, and immediately became the topic of this is why Lutheran denominations aren't confessional or purely Lutheran enough. Now, for this next part, I'm going to read an exchange between Leroy Green and Luke Trembrule on this discussion. Leroy Green starts out by saying, Luke Trembrule, you are right in several regards. We do not know if they had procedures, what they were, or if they were followed. We also do not know what conversations took place and with who. We do not know what the facts are. He means are. All we can do is speculate at this point. To determine guilt or innocence on social media without facts is a sin. Well, he would mean is a sin. He wrote in a sin. You stated that if they had procedures, they were not followed. You do not know the facts, and therefore you contributing to spreading gossip. God has placed the authorities in place to judge guilt or innocence, not social media. Once guilt has been established, then and only then should we weigh in with our righteous judgmental attitudes. Misspelled judgmental there. Luke responds to Leroy Green saying, "The information given says that the pastor left voicemails defending the accused before the authorities were contacted. This tells me they either didn't have a proper procedure in place or they didn't follow it. There are no is in all caps, other options if the information shared is correct. We know evil people do use churches to target children. Therefore, we must act so that these little ones are kept safe in the Lord. I know the hurt and shame a pastor causes when he doesn't act on behalf of the vulnerable." I never thought I would say this, but how is Luke Trumbrule, the guy who would otherwise be saying a bunch of crazy stuff, how is he making sense here more so than anybody else? Here he's focusing on the main issue at hand, that this is an issue of spiritual abuse that turned into sexual abuse. I don't know what he said that prompted Leroy to respond the way that he did, but I do find his response to Leroy very telling, as well as just the slightest bit heartening. It's good to see that there are people who recognize this issue as what it truly is. It's not an issue of communion. It's not an issue of doctrine. It's an issue of a predator pretending to be one of the holy men so that he can force unwilling participants, allegedly in this case, to engage in sex with him, i.e. rape. Leroy Green could have left it at that, but he did not. Instead, he decided to respond to Luke's comment saying, "Luke, how do you know the information provided is correct? In Texas, when abuse is suspected, you call CPS, not the police." Oh God, Leroy. Okay. It is up to CPS to contact law enforcement. Again, you are spreading gossip without knowing the law or the facts. God did not empower you, me, or anyone else on social media to proclaim guilt or incense. I think he means innocence, but this is just too funny to not read the way he wrote. God's appointed judge of guilt or innocence is the criminal justice system, not you. You think you know all the facts, but perhaps you don't. Wow. The conservative keyboard justice warrior is strong with this one. Leroy then goes on to continue saying, "All gossip starts with, quote, I heard that, ... end quote, or, quote, if the information is correct, ... end quote, which he's just mimicking the position that most pastors, called workers, and other leaders in the synod would also take, so I'm not too surprised at his stance. I am surprised that Luke's response to him, saying, Leroy Green, so all news is gossip and beyond our comment? ? What? Luke is being reasonable here? Impossible. Leroy responds to Luke's comment saying, the news is that he was arrested. That is news. You stated that the admin is guilty of neglect. That is not news based of fact. That is gossip. Leroy Green then continues in a separate comment saying, I think a proper pastoral comment would be to pray the God would support all the victims in this tragic event, show them God's love and sacrifice, and give peace. Gossip is, quote, the administration is guilty of neglect, end quote. No, Leroy did not use the word would in his statement, the God support all the victims in this tragic event. However, I personally could not let that affront to an English sentence pass without me trying to salvage it somewhat. You would think Leroy Green would be happy with that. No, he's not. He then goes off to make a separate comment thread apart from this one, again, tagging Luke Trumbrule here, saying, over 50,000 children are sexually abused and prosecuted every year. The facts have litigated and the guilty prosecuted. I am baffled as to why you are focused on a case in litigation. Why are we focused on this one? There are so many that deserve our righteous condemnation. Are we trying to discredit LCMS and church schools, and this is the best example? I am confused with this group's focus. Why this one when the facts are in dispute and when so many are truly deserving? Luke responds saying, Leroy Green, I am focused on this one because it was shared here. I didn't seek the story, share it, or say anything to discredit the LCMS. In fact, it is because of those 50,000 children that when a story like this arises, we must emphasize how we can do our best to keep children safe at our churches and schools. Predators often choose churches they perceive to be soft targets. Having clear policies and following them not only can help victims but can deter the abuse. Leroy Green is not done here. He responds to Luke's comment saying, the admin says the incident did not take place. Leroy, every administration says whatever incident at whatever school/church/workplace/whatever, they all claim the incidences never took place. That's not a point. Continues on to say, in America, every man or organization gets a day in court before a guilty verdict. You are declaring the admin guilty without knowing their policies, if they were followed, or if the allegation is true. By pronouncing guilt before their day in court, you are promoting Marxist ideology. Don't think for 1 second you are not immune to false allegations and social media condemnation. What is this overbearing focus on Marxist ideology, Leroy? Take a chill pill and get off of Twitter. Or, in this case, Gab. Luke responds to Leroy saying, following the process to have an allegation investigated is not declaring someone guilty. Nor am I passing judgment on the pastor and the church administration, declaring them guilty. Rather, I am saying that this was not handled properly. We need to do better. Also, the family going to the news also acted improperly. By not following the proper... I knew it was too good to be true. By not following the proper process, true or not, they sowed more suspicion and distrust. We get our day in court, yes, but for those who are in the public ministry, they are to be above reproach and of good reputation. Until cleared of wrongdoing, it will not be proper for this young man to teach. It is sad all around. Oh my God, yeah, I knew. I'm sorry, it was too good to be true. So Luke, by saying this was not handled properly, starts out in a good place, acknowledging that there were some things that the administration could have did better. I would like to think he would agree that them attempting to cover it up would be one of them. Then he goes on to say that the family going to the news acted improperly. The family went to the news because their allegations to the school were being dismissed. You saying that they weren't following the proper process, they sowed more suspicion and distrust. What would you have them do? Listen to the school administration and just sit by and not file a report with authorities? Is that what you're suggesting they should have done, Luke? Now, I bring up the fact that the parents went to the news because the church didn't take their allegations seriously. What I mean when I say a church takes an allegation seriously is they immediately encourage the family to file a police report. Then they also contact the police and ask that they do an investigation. The police make that determination, not the church, not the religious school administration. That is not their jurisdiction. And the main reason that I'm harping on this is because Luke himself includes a screenshot from the article attached to a later comment. I will show a picture of the comment that it's attached to in this video, but for brevity's sake, I'm not going to read it here. I'm just going to read the screenshot that he took. The screenshot that he took is of the link, the original link to the CBS News article, which I will link here in the description below. The screenshot that was taken of that article reads as follows. In an interview, Jessica and Aaron Van Dam said after their daughter came forward in mid-August, 3 months after the alleged incident, church and school leaders said the teen was lying. The accusations amounted to slander and gossip, and the parents say administrators warned them not to discuss the accusations with anyone. Quote, "We were treated as guilty," end quote, said Aaron Van Dam, the girl's father. Quote, "We were completely ostracized. We were treated as if we were the bad people," end quote. Within days after the accusations became known in August to the Van Dams and to church administrators, the Van Dams say church pastor Andrew Farhat left them multiple voicemails, which they shared with CBS News Colorado. The voicemails preceded any police investigation into the matter. Quote, "Nothing bad happened," end quote, Farhat said in one of the messages. Quote, "I knew it was a lie, so I wanted to squash it right away so that no one would think that the police need to be involved. Now we're protecting victims of slander. Don't want that at our school," end quote. It figures. Just when you think that there's some hope for the people on the WELS Discussions page, you realize that they are perfectly okay with the same insular policies and procedures that protect them against the outside world and that also protect the abusers of their children. That is it for today's video. Please like, subscribe, share, leave a comment down below, and I will see you in the next one. Thank you.
But some of the shepherds have pastured themselves on their sheep. So he has come out against them and scattered his people of faith. But there still is one faith, one hope, and one baptism, one God and Father of all. There is one